As a kid growing up in England, I knew of no one that represented a country other than that of their birth. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it was so rare that I certainly didn't know of them. Things were a lot simpler back then. Maybe not fair, but for sure more straightforward. I would look at the departure board at Heathrow International Airport and only imagine such exotic and far-off lands such as Qatar, the South Sea Islands and Ethiopia. Having now travelled to about a third of the countries in the world and lived in the US, Switzerland, Spain, France and the UAE, I now realise how small this world really is, and that the migration of people for many reasons is now commonplace. It goes without saying that places of residence and therefore locations of where athletes ply their trade has also changed significantly. Probably there isn't a major sport or national team that hasn't had at least one of their athletes switching allegiance. So is it fair that athletes can switch or choose their nationality, and what are the effects of these switches? First, I think it's important to understand exactly the reasons athletes may switch countries to play. Well, this can easily be explained, and it's due to the migration of people either voluntarily or by necessity. The voluntary migration is often driven by financial incentives, the potential to participate in sporting events that might not have been previously possible with the athlete staying in their original country, or maybe marriage to a person from another country has an influence. Other reasons for migration might unfortunately be because of war or politics. Just because an athlete lives in a new country doesn't necessarily give them automatic rights to represent that new country. All sports federations have clear guidelines on an athlete's eligibility to represent a country. I will explain about some other sports shortly, but basically the IOC say normally any competitor in the Olympic Games must be a national of the National Olympic Committee which is entering the competitor. A competitor who is a national of two or more countries at the same time may represent either one of them as they may elect. However, having represented one country in the Olympic Games, they may not represent another country unless they meet certain other conditions, such as waiting at least 3 years since the competitor last represented their former country. This period may be reduced or even cancelled if there are exceptional circumstances. Also, if an associated state, province or overseas department, a country or colony acquires independence, if a country becomes incorporated within another country by reason of a change of border, if a country merges with another country, a competitor may continue to represent the country to which they belong or belonged. However, they may, if they prefer, elect to represent their country or be entered into the Olympic Games by the new National Olympic Committee if one exists. This particular choice may be made only once. Historically, jus sanguine, meaning the right to citizenship by blood ties, and jus soli, which is the right to citizenship by territorial birthright, are well-known determinations of citizenship and nationality. However, the more recent principle of jus nexi, meaning citizenship by connection, rootedness, or linkage, which is for those who live or work in a country for a specific number of years, usually between 5 and 7, but sometimes much less, who are then regarded as new members of that country. Jus sanguine is normally quite straightforward in that if the athlete's parents or grandparents were, for example, German or Brazilian, then the athlete could choose to represent either country, even though they had dual nationality. In principle, it would be possible to represent both nations in completely different sports as long as the governing bodies were not the same. Jus soli is also very straightforward in that citizenship might be given to any athlete born in that country. Anyone born in the USA automatically gains citizenship irrelevant of the parents. However, this isn't the case in all countries. For example, a child born in the UK without a parent with the UK citizenship doesn't automatically gain citizenship, and so they can only participate for the countries of their parents' and grandparents' citizenship. Both jus sanguine and jus soli seem logical to me. Jus nexi, for me, is a little more contentious. There are many countries that use or abuse this rule, and some countries are obsessed for various reasons as being seen to be successful in sport. The number of medals won per country is regarded as an indication of the country's economic or military prowess and reputation. I will give some examples later of countries that have used jus nexi to their advantage. The whole participating for one country's situation is further complicated when athletes have eligibility to represent more than two countries, such as the case of Dutch national footballer Jonathan de Guzman. He could have played through maternal ancestry for Jamaica, the Philippines with his paternal ancestry, Canada, where he was born, or the Netherlands, where he started his career and was eligible to play after naturalisation. His brother Julian actually played for Canada. In Jonathan's case, he chose to play for the Netherlands. The virtually limitless way of gaining eligibility to represent a country gives opportunity for athletes to navigate preferred routes to their sport's biggest stages. Footballer Adnan Januzaj was eligible to play for 6 different countries. He was born and raised in Belgium. He qualified to play for Albania through his Kosovan Albanian parents, but Kosovo's national team at the time were not members of UEFA or FIFA. As Kosovo's independence wasn't recognised by the United Nations, he could play for Serbia. He also qualified to play for Turkey through his grandparents. Finally, as he played for Manchester United at an early stage of his career, he could have acquired the right to play for England after 5 years. Ultimately, he chose to play for Belgium. The 1998 Football World Cup winners, France, was celebrating for its multicultural team. Their starting 11 for the World Cup final included 3 players: Marcel Desailly, Christian Karembo, and Lilian Thuram, who were born outside of the mainland, and both Zinedine Zidane and Yuri Djurkaev were of immigrant heritage. An interesting situation is that of the Algerian team in the 2014 World Cup. Algeria arrived with almost 70% of its team who were born and raised in France. In total, there were 25 players born in France who did not represent France in that World Cup. However, those who were eligible and opted for the French team were not always received patriotically. French international Karim Benzema said, basically, if I score, I'm French, and if I don't score or there are problems, I'm Arab. There are many instances where citizenships have been given to athletes in a much shorter period of time than the average person might have to complete when there is no paternal ancestry nor any birthright claim. Becky Hammon and Victor Ann are good examples of this. The female basketball player Becky Hammon was one of the most talented basketball players in the US. She signed a $2 million contract to play for CSKA Moscow. Even though Hammon is not of Russian descent, speaks no Russian, and is not a full-time resident, she was fast-tracked for Russian citizenship by the highest levels of the Russian government. As Hammon had never competed in a sanctioned international competition for American basketball, FIBA rules allowed her to represent another country in the Olympics. Capitalising on the fact that FIBA rules allow one naturalised citizen to compete for each country, the Russians offered Hammon not only a passport, but also an opportunity to play at the Olympics. In 2006, short track skater An Hun-soo won 3 gold medals for South Korea. Due to injuries, Korea did not need him after 2010, so An went searching for a new Olympic allegiance, having fallen out with the South Korean Skating Federation. He and his father investigated naturalisation for top athletes in several countries. There were no shortage of opportunities. In 2011, An Hun-soo became a Russian citizen. He even changed his name to Victor An and pledged to compete for his adopted homeland at the Sochi Games in 2014. In the Rio Summer Olympics in 2016, Azerbaijan and Qatar were well-known states willing to buy success. Azerbaijan sent 56 athletes to the Olympic Games. However, foreign athletes who changed their citizenship to compete under the Azerbaijani flag made up more than 60% of that delegation. 23 of Qatar's 39 athletes were not born in Qatar. Its handball team of 14 players included 11 foreign-born athletes. This was more or less the same team of mercenaries that won silver at the 2015 championships the year before. Yvonne Anderson, new playing in the Olympics for the US, was a long shot at best. However, the Arkansas native competed at the Tokyo Games with Serbia as a naturalised citizen. Some top athletes have become experts at using existing rules and negotiating an exchange of their skills for citizenships, passports, money, and access to competition. Lascelles Brown was born in Jamaica in 1974. He was a member of the Jamaican national bobsled team from 1999 to 2004, competing at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. He applied for Canadian citizenship in 2005, where he met and married his Canadian wife, Cara. It was awarded to him by special exemption just prior to the 2006 Winter Olympics, letting him compete for Canada at the Games in Turin. Brown competed at the 2010 Winter Olympics, winning bronze in the four-man event. Brown then became a competitor for Monaco at the start of the 2010 season and was apparently very well paid for his services. Similar cases have occurred in many sports. The famous footballers Laszlo Kubala and Alfredo Di Stefano played for 3 different national teams. Kubala played for Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Spain, while Di Stefano played for Spain, Argentina and Colombia. However, their migration history was less opportunistic and money-driven and more politically motivated. Zola Budd, a middle and long-distance runner born in 1966 in South Africa, her parents were also born in South Africa. At the age of 17, Budd broke the women's 5,000 metre world record. Since her performance took place in South Africa, then excluded from international athletics competitions because of its apartheid policy, the IAAF refused to ratify her time as an official world record. A British tabloid, the Daily Mail, persuaded Budd's father to encourage her to apply for British citizenship on the grounds that her grandfather was British, to circumvent the international cultural and sporting boycott of South Africa. The Daily Mail bought the exclusive rights to Budd's story and put £40,000 into a fund for her, as well as providing rent-free housing for the family and finding a job for her father. The Daily Mail started an active campaign and began to put pressure on a series of ministers to give Budd a passport and enable her to represent Team GB at the 1984 Summer Games. Just 10 days after she formally applied for British citizenship, she got her passport. Interestingly, Budd showed her love for Team GB by competing for South Africa in the 1992 Olympics after the country was readmitted to international competition. So what about athletes that are victims of the global refugee crisis that are seeing millions of people in the world displaced? Well, the IOC has created the Refugee Olympic Team. 10 athletes who originally hailed from Ethiopia, South Sudan, Syria and the Democratic Republic of Congo took part in the Rio Olympic Games of 2016. The team grew to 29 athletes in Tokyo 2020. Returning to football quickly, there are some current and ex-professional footballers that hold the view that once you play for your country, your colours have been nailed to the mast. However, as we know, this hasn't always been the case. Here's a list of the players that don't agree and have switched national teams. Also, with a certain amount of irony, Granit Xhaka, who had previously played for Albania but switched to Switzerland, he then faced his elder brother in a match against Albania in the 2016 European Championships. In late 2020, FIFA announced that the eligibility rules have been updated in what are described as the first wholesale modernisation of the rules. The previous rules allowed a player to change the national team only once, but the 2020 update also facilitates a reversal of the change request in certain specific circumstances. So what are the new eligibility rules? First, it is now possible for a player to change national team even if they have played competitively at senior level, provided the player held the nationality of their new association at the time of their first official appearance for their first national team. The player played in no more than 3 competitive senior games before the age of 21. The player had not played in the final stage of an official tournament such as the World Cup, European Championships, Copa America, etc. At least 3 years have passed since the player's last senior appearance for their previous national team. Finally, a competitive cap will not keep a player tied to a national team in the event that they suddenly become stateless, that is, lose their nationality against their will. Rugby union players can now change allegiances if they were born in the country they want to represent or have a parent or grandparent born there. They can switch only once, and this has to be after a stand-down period of 3 years from international rugby. Under the current regulations, a player is captured once they have won a senior cap and therefore tied to that country and unable to play for another nation. However, the new process will see players able to play for 2 different countries during the course of their international career. World Rugby believes the change will benefit players and the global competitiveness of rugby. The Birthright Amendment was approved by the World Rugby Council and stands to benefit countries such as Fiji, Tonga and Samoa, amongst others. So, do we need a solution, or is there a no problem with athletes changing their national allegiance? Are things okay as they are? Or are the latest developments in football and rugby just the tip of the iceberg, and soon the whole situation will become even more watered down and much more liberal in the representation of countries. Don't forget that every athlete that changes country allegiance means that another athlete, admittedly potentially not as good, is prevented from participation in the event. So there are many victims in the story. I know possibly these athletes might not even qualify to participate in the event, say the Olympics, or the teams might not even qualify for events unless it was up to the new citizens that are raising the standards of that team. So, shall we leave it as it is? Maybe roll back the clock a little and say a maximum of 2 countries can be represented in an athlete's lifetime. One of the problems is that in the sport's biggest competitions, we don't always see the best athletes on its stage. In rugby union, there are many players from South Africa and New Zealand, much better than most of the players in the tournament, that don't get the opportunity to play because their national first team standard is so high. If you were an Egyptian and played squash, there is a possibility that you could be a world top 10 player and not be able to participate in the Olympics, if it was an Olympic sport. Such is the dominance of their players at the moment. Same for Chinese table tennis players, US basketballers, French footballers, and many, many more. Maybe sports competitions need to be mandated to include just, say for instance, the world's top 20, irrelevant to their nationality, and then all countries have their normal quota on top. This is not as crazy as it sounds and would help stem the migration of athletes to new welcoming countries. What about a draconian measure mandating that it is only the country you're born in? This would make the rule very clear, but would be quite unfair to many. How about a complete free-for-all? Anyone can represent any country. The first few modern Olympics followed this model when they were reinstated in 1896. I don't mind the residence rule, but I would pick a timescale and 100% stick to it. I think 5 years of continued and permanent residence gives the athlete enough claim to citizenship. I would definitely put a limit on the hereditary lineage in the principle of just sanguine. I would limit it to just parents of the athletes, not up to their grandparents. What do you think about the situation? Does it need changing? I'm sure there will be many thoughts and opinions on the subject, and I really look forward to reading them in the comments below. Did you know that on the 14th of Feb 2005, Arsenal welcomed Crystal Palace to Highbury? In Arsene Wenger's squad, there were 6 French players, 3 Spanish, 2 Dutch, and 1 from Germany, Cameroon, the Ivory Coast, Brazil, and Switzerland. The most noteworthy thing, however, was that for the first time ever, there were no English players in a top-flight English league squad. We have also seen an NBA game that had 10 non-American players on court for the first time ever. I will drill down into the club level of migration of athletes in a forthcoming film. I'm creating quite a library of films all related to sport, and I'm sure you will find some of them very, very interesting. I'm producing new ones all the time, so please subscribe and hit the like button. Not only does it really help the channel, but it also makes sure you don't miss out on the new releases. Thanks for watching, and as I said, I'm really looking forward to hearing your views on the topic. Also, feel free to correct or advise me if I've made any factual mistakes or if the situation changes over time. I know you're interested in sports, so please check out my book with thousands of the best sports facts and jokes. It's available online and in good bookshops.